The Golden Needle by Gillian Bickley. Frederick Stewart was born in a humble village in northeastern Scotland and carried out his life's work in the small British Crown colony of Hong Kong. Contradicting the early pessimism of colonial treasurer Montgomery Martin, Stewart accurately prophesied 27 days before his death that Hong Kong would become one of the great trading communities of the world. At no distant period, every available corner of the island will be covered with dwellings or manufactories. Stewart never married. Yet if you go now to the Protestant cemetery in Hong Kong, to the old part, where forgotten names bear witness to lives once as vibrant as our own, you will see flowers on his grave. Contemporaries saw Stewart's work as significant in hewing out understanding and sympathy between the two worlds of East and West, through initiating each side into the culture of the other. His life has been a palimpsest on which many have written an archetype answering their personal needs. Shortly after his death, Hong Kong and British perspectives combined to assert Stewart's role as pioneer, a builder of institutions, and a unifying force in Hong Kong society. He perhaps understood better than any public man who has ever served here the relations which ought to subsist between the various races which compose our somewhat heterogeneous community. A new Chinese master, Chan Tzu-fei, at Stewart's school, where all nationalities were accepted from 1867, also saw this. Boys of different ages, whether clever or otherwise, are admitted without distinction. Natives and foreigners learn together, and the intelligence of each is developed. It is only right, then, that youths of talent should cheerfully crowd together into one hall for their education. In Scotland, the dominant view was that Stewart's life and successful career could serve as an encouragement to all. He rose to the eminent position which he occupied at his death by sheer perseverance and ability. In Hong Kong, the Chinese admired his personality and intelligence. They respected him as a scholar, teacher, and administrator. "You have grounded yourself in excellent principles," the teachers in his schools announced. "You have furnished an invaluable example to future scholars. You are a renowned English scholar, yet you became an instructor of our Chinese youth. Heaven has largely gifted you with intelligence. Your character is as pure gold and precious gems, and the number of your good deeds daily increases. You especially excel in administrative ability. Even in your youth, the range of your studies was extensive," they continued, "and you then gradually mastered the principles of literature and science. In your manhood, you travelled abroad, and here in this colony of Hong Kong, you founded a great school." The British saw Stewart as typifying the virtues of the time, in a way made poignant by their common condition of alienation from home. "I am a stranger with thee, a sojourner, as all my fathers were." One of Stewart's Chinese pupils, with no Western father that he ever acknowledged, saw in the bachelor Stewart a man in need of a spiritual son. Stewart created the Hong Kong government education system. At its apex and core, in the city of Victoria, named after the Queen of England, was its flagship Central School. Here English and Chinese languages and subjects were taught equally. After its initial years, when only Chinese pupils were accepted, all nationalities studied together. Many pupils came to Hong Kong from China and elsewhere, specifically to study under Stewart. Your teaching has been like a bell tolling in the distance, but which causes the reasonable rain and dews to descend in copious showers on the distant fields, said the teachers in his schools in 1878, when Stewart departed on home leave. According to a regular system, for 16 years you have skilfully taught them, and your teaching has been varied and extensive. A multitude, upwards of 2,000 in number, have listened to your words, and these have been correspondingly fruitful in result. Father and son in succession have received your instruction, and brothers have assisted you in carrying out your commands. Even in places separated by mountains and clouds, the people have heard of your fame and have come to sit at your feet. The time was well before the reform of the Chinese educational system in 1905. Outside the central school, in the Hong Kong villages, there were traditional Chinese schools teaching the Confucian classics. Patiently and increasingly successfully, Stewart encouraged these schools to take the central school as a model and associate with it. In 1873, Stewart established the Grant-in-Aid scheme, which was offered to all non-government schools that wished to participate according to the rules. After this, the number of schools, school personnel and pupils coming under direct government inspection, control and influence increased steadily and continually. Within the Chinese mainland, the textbooks written to serve this scheme were voluntarily adopted in many missionary schools. Masters and former pupils of Stewart's Central School wrote other textbooks, translations, and language learning aids, and these can still be found today. Stewart's influence extended beyond Hong Kong to China, elsewhere in the Far East, and in the many other countries where pupils and masters, educated and trained within the Hong Kong government education system, worked or settled. At the time, new government modern schools were being established in Qing dynasty China, as part of China's own modernization process. Pupils from Stewart's Central School were solicited to further their studies in these. In Hong Kong, merchants and government departments employed Stewart's pupils as clerks. Many became businessmen, and some became immensely rich. Several became greatly influential. One became the first Chinese to be knighted by the British Crown. Stewart's pupils were active in public affairs and in politics. In 1899, Lord Charles Beresford, former pupil of Stubbington House School, where, as it happened, Stewart had once held a brief teaching post, visited China and Hong Kong, representing the Associated British Chamber of Commerce. 4 of Stewart's former pupils are on record for their part during this visit. A Chinese meeting was held in Hong Kong on the 22nd of January 1899. The surviving report is attributed to the chairman, Lo Chi-tu, the senior among the Chinese masters at the Central School and honorary secretary of the Old Boys Association, and the secretary, Ho Fuk. Resolutions were passed on the motion of Ho Fuk's elder brother, Ho Tung, seconded by Leung Xiuquang. Both the Ho brothers had been Stewart's pupils. Later, two other former pupils, Wei Yuk and Ho Kai, both now members of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, wrote a public letter to Lord Charles. In their letter, Wei Yuk and Ho Kai urged Britain to act forcefully and to apply firm pressure on the Qing government for reform. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of the short-lived Chinese Republic, which finally succeeded in overthrowing the 266-year-old Manchu Empire on the 10th of October 1911, had been a pupil at Stewart's Central School. It thus provided part of the whole cluster of Western influences which, in symbiotic relationship with many other factors, led to Sun's revolutionary ideas. Hundreds of other young men who, like Sun, were educated in Hong Kong during the period of Stewart's influence, also played a role in the modernization of China. In 1923, 2 years before his death, Sun Yat-sen visited the University of Hong Kong. In a speech to the students, he clearly expressed his debt to Hong Kong for its example of a liberal society. He told them that, when formulating his ideas for change in China as a young man, he thought of the beautiful streets of Hong Kong, the artistic parks, and wondered why Englishmen could do such a thing on this barren rock within 70 or 80 years. Why could not China, in the last 4,000 years, have a place like this? Further, Sun attributed to the Hong Kong example his plans for the overthrow of imperial China. He got the revolutionary idea in this very place, in the colony of Hong Kong. Speaking next of the obstacles that his Chinese Republic had encountered, Sun said, "As soon as the Chinese had good government, they would be contented. The 600,000 in Hong Kong were examples of Chinese being contented and peaceful citizens under good government." Sun concluded his speech by reminding the students that they were studying in an English colony and in an English university. They must therefore learn the English example of carrying good government to every part of China. According to British chroniclers and historians, it was news of the preliminaries of a Sino-British treaty that led to the originally unofficial British settlement of Hong Kong Island, which took place on the 26th of January 1841. Subsequently, on the 26th of June 1843, it was ceded to Britain in perpetuity. By the Convention of Peking, signed on the 24th of October 1860, Kowloon Peninsula, with Stonecutters Island, was also ceded to Britain on the same terms. As late as June 1898, the new territories and numerous islands were leased by Britain from China for a period of 99 years, beginning on the 1st of July 1898. It was in response to this lease that on the 30th of June 1997, Britain handed back all 3 parts of this territory to China. Frederick Stewart's career thus occupies most of the second of 3 unequal stages in the British presence in Hong Kong. Frederick Stewart was 25 years old when he arrived in Hong Kong. During his 27 years of paid and voluntary work, he occupied many different roles. He was educator and school inspector, member of the Hong Kong government's Board of Examiners in Chinese language, gunner in the Hong Kong Volunteers, and assistant superintendent of the volunteer Hong Kong Fire Brigade. He was sheriff, coroner, and magistrate. he was Registrar General. Finally, he was a popular choice as head of the permanent Hong Kong Civil Service. As teacher, magistrate and administrator, Stewart dealt with people from Chinese, Portuguese, Indian, Japanese, Western and cross-cultural families. As Registrar General, he helped girls kidnapped for prostitution. He was associated with Sir John Smale in concern for Hong Kong's domestic slaves, or Moi Tsai. As Colonial Secretary, Stewart negotiated with China for the erection of a necessary lighthouse. The story of his life is a window into the whole life of the Hong Kong community at that time. Stewart's personal qualities were admirable. Qualities of courtesy and quietness, patience and tolerance. He was modest, amiable, affectionate and gentle, persistent and flexible, generous and sympathetic. He was courageous, dedicated and independent, and also efficient. He was pragmatic and idealistic, a man of good will. He had the ability to deal with people of all types, nationalities and races. His vision was one of mutual respect between peoples and cultures, of material and moral benefit which individuals and nations shared. In Hong Kong, Stewart immediately gained recognition of his worth. For 16 years at least, in tune with his society, he acted with the highest degree of autonomy. All but one Hong Kong governor and all administrators were supportive, some deeply supportive of his work. Government servants at the Colonial Office in London found reports of Stewart's work highly interesting. Important officials within Imperial China found it provocative. At least one of those who passed through Hong Kong visited and praised Stewart's Central School. Then, with his career at a high point, when his educational work was ready to take another leap forward, Stewart was checked. He was personally and professionally challenged by the newly arrived governor, John Pope Hennessy, whose thoughts centred on his own political advancement at home. Other strong personalities joined in. Roman Catholic Bishop Raimondi, concerned for the development of his church. German Protestant missionary Ernst Johann Eitel, concerned for his own advancement. After a period of confusion, Stewart embarked on a new phase in his Hong Kong career, within the mainstream government administration. By the time of his death in 1889, Stewart had been head of the local civil service for 2 years, occasionally acting as governor. Hong Kong has long been regarded with great interest by those who have seen its opportunities as a meeting place of East and West. In Hong Kong itself, the years of intercourse and mutual development have had their result. At first, the mainly male Chinese residents left their families in China. They were responsive to the commands of the mandarins at home. Virtually the whole Chinese population abandoned work on more than one occasion and flocked back to China. By 1997, many Hong Kong people had been born in Hong Kong. They regarded themselves as permanent residents, with a special lifestyle of their own. Many hoped that the achievements of their chosen home would be enhanced following the 30th of June 1997, when, after 156 years, Britain handed over not only the leased new territories, but Kowloon and Hong Kong Island also, to the People's Republic of China. In the early days of the 19th century, a number of citizens of Western countries were inspired by the altruistic goal of the modernization and liberalization of China. Their motivations were varied. Some had the straightforward missionary motivation of the Christian gospel. "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel." They saw in their dreams a Chinese figure imploring them, saying, "Come over and help us." There was Morrison, the first Protestant missionary to China, who translated both the New and the Old Testaments into Chinese. There was Legge, a successor within the same missionary organization. He performed the complementary work of translating the Chinese classics into English. There were medical missionaries like the American Peter Parker. After British administration in Hong Kong was established, missionaries like these valued the territory as a secure place close to China. From here, China itself might be understood. From here, China might be influenced to understand and accept Christianity. Others, equally in the Christian liberal tradition, were moved by an unshakable belief in the virtues of a Western education. They too were controlled by a sense of mission. They had a deep and passionate concern for the overwhelming number of their fellow humans in China, whom they perceived as languishing in confining darkness of mind and spirit. Their initial desire was not, however, to Christianize, but they knew that the acceptance of Christianity might follow in due course. By offering a Western education, they wanted to loosen what they saw as the shackles of ignorance. By enlightening the mind and spirit, they wished to offer to each individual the most complete fulfillment in this life of which he was capable. It is difficult to separate these two motivations, to Christianize and to liberalize by education. Some, the missionary Legge was one of these, were taught by long experience the difficulty of proselytizing the Chinese. These came to accept Western education as a prior goal, as a foundation upon which the true goal of Christianization might be built. Others, impelled to convey the benefits of a Western education, were in their personal lives devout followers of the Christian religion. Frederick Stewart moved from the first position to the second. In 1861, he responded to a newspaper advertisement for twin Hong Kong posts, headmaster of the Hong Kong Government Central School and inspector of Hong Kong government schools. He did so in the belief that education was a necessary foundation for the ultimate Christianizing of China, wishing to contribute to this work. In his first years in Hong Kong, Stewart associated himself with the proselytizing work of the Hong Kong Anglican Mission. However, the role he chose later, matured over time and experience, and conditioned by circumstance, was not to Christianize. It was to make available to the Chinese and the other nationalities who were later admitted to his school a liberalizing education. The curriculum balanced Western subjects and Chinese subjects, and also improved pupils' prospects in life. However, Stewart's post was created to teach English to the Chinese. Powerful members of the community considered that this should be the sole purpose of the school. At times, parents and pupils wanted this also. But Stewart insisted that the curriculum should be a double one. One half of the school day devoted to the English language and Western subjects. one half of the day to the Chinese language and the traditional Confucian curriculum. Without knowledge of the written Chinese which bound the Chinese Empire together, his Chinese pupils would be unable to communicate with their fellow countrymen. Stewart was emphatic in his insistence that his pupils should not be alienated from their own culture, but should rather be enriched by a familiarity with two cultures. Stewart's pupils were deeply grateful for the material benefits that his teaching had brought them. "Your arduous labours in the cause of education in this place are fully appreciated by all of us," they said in a complimentary address. "Your instructions have been extended to all without distinction. We now thank you for the instruction which you gave to us, as otherwise we could never have held the positions we now hold under the respective governments of Hong Kong and China, and in commercial houses." One in particular, Sir Robert Hordung, adopted a role of filial respect. The flowers on Stewart's grave are there at his request. By his own extensive educational and charitable philanthropy, his generous willingness to meet others more than halfway, and his distinguished leadership, Sir Robert showed his acceptance and sympathy with the liberal values that Stewart sought to live by, and inspired his pupils to follow. Today, members of the Hordung family continue the tradition. Like other communities around the world, the broader Hong Kong community also has reached a stage where education is seen by some not just as a means to livelihood, but to the greatest fulfillment which each individual can achieve.